seen from Liliana's post this morning on Facebook, now this is gonna be a full and intense day, full of inputs and conversation, discussions, workshops, and most importantly, policy recommendations to be presented tomorrow at the Parliament in Skopje. Just a few introductory words. I'm Gabriele, and member of the IPG team, the preparatory group team for the second year now, good friend of Youth Alliance Krushevo, and now probably an adopted child of Krushevo as well. I work in cultural and educational policies field in Brussels, like same city. I actually share with two of the panelists that are today here with us, and I'm a journalist on foreign affairs. The topic of today is going to be, actually, yes, youth engagement, youth of today. So actually, probably the overarching and topic of the whole conference that is focused on you, on young people and policy recommendations from young people. And we will go through this topic thanks to a very diverse and, I must say, happily gender-balanced panel today. And it has been a great improvement having a diverse, gender-balanced panel, so I'm happy, very happy about that. And such a panel is actually the dream of every chair because it is very diverse. We will hear very different points of views. At the same time, it is the nightmare of every chair, and Liliana is the nightmare of every chair because she has entrusted me with time management of this panel. We have slightly less than 2 hours, and we will need to fit all the interventions and your, most importantly, interventions in those 2 hours. So I really beg everyone, please be short, please be disciplined, and we'll make that work. So just so now I shut up and I move to introduce the panelists. On my right here we have Tim Allan, who was working for the Socialist and Democrat group in the European Parliament, and now he's in the cabinet of most newly elected President of the European Parliament, David Sassoli. Aida Brdar, who's a local activist in Bosnia and Herzegovina and will tell us a lot about her work. So already you see the institution and the grassroots dimension, and I'm very much keen on that. And Alba Brojka, who has just also started her new role as special representative on youth and security of the OSCE chairperson in office, so Slovakia. And Josip Milicevic. It's not going to be easy with your name, actually, Marija, for me. And who's from Croatia Youth Council, and again, another youth activist who will tell us about what he does in order to tackle prejudices social prejudices in his country. And then Marija Topuyovska Latkovikj, who will present us the study on key data and figures of young people in southeastern European region. So what are the numbers and figures related to young people in the region? Now time for me to shut up and to pass the word to our panelists, and so make the most out of it and enjoy the discussion. Tim, floor is yours. You will present a bit the European youth strategy and give us some inputs for engaging then in the discussion in what is the role of young people vis-a-vis institutions. Tim, you have the floor, please. Which one do you prefer as a mic?
Let's try this one. This sounds okay. Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction. Yeah, as already mentioned, I am, wait 1 second, I will start a stopwatch just to make sure I'm strict on my time. Yeah, so I'm working now for the President of the European Parliament. I've been working in Brussels for 7 years. For the last 4 years, I've been with the Socialist and Democrats group as a spokesperson and also working in the press. Before that, I worked at the European Commission and also for a while at the European Defence Agency. So what I wanted to do was just give a bit about my personal experiences, also introduce a bit about the EU youth strategy, say what I see as positives about it, but also what I see as dangers, and then also just finish on the general point of trying to get a bit of a discussion going on how young people can better influence EU policy and national policy. So firstly, in terms of my own experience, this is quite a personal topic for me because I'd say that there was 3 moments in my life where EU programs or rights I have as an EU citizen drove kind of the force of my career, drove where I am. Firstly, doing Erasmus in Amsterdam, it really opened up what possibilities were available for me, and also, introduced me to people who are now working all over the world. So it was really a big formative experience for me. Secondly, freedom of movement. After I finished university, I was unemployed, didn't have a clue what I was doing, and the fact that I had freedom of movement meant I could move back to Amsterdam and actually had the opportunity to then find work there, and that set my path career. And the third one was actually doing a traineeship in the European Parliament through the what's called the Schuman traineeship, which actually took me to Brussels and has basically set my career path there. Just as a side note on that, the traineeships are open to anyone, both from EU countries and non-EU countries. And if you're interested in EU policy making, if you're interested in learning more about what goes on in Brussels, it's really an excellent introduction, so would fully recommend applying. So anyway, the main topic I'm talking about is the EU youth strategy. Just out of interest, are people aware of the EU youth strategy in this room? Show of hands, anyone? Yeah, quite a lot. Okay, good. That's really not bad. And was anyone involved in the process, in the deliberations, in the a few? Okay, a few. That's good. I mean, that's not a bad start. So basically, what the strategy is it's the official EU approach to youth for the period of 2019 to 2027. It was approved last year in December by heads of state and government at the European Council. And it was based on 2 years of consultation period with youth organisations, also just general surveys with youth. Apparently there's 50,000 young people contacted. But what they've come up with is basically 11 policy areas where they see that they need to focus on for this next 8-year period. So firstly, better connecting the EU with young people, so in terms of actually engaging them in the kind of decision-making processes. Secondly, in terms of making sure of gender equality. Thirdly, creating inclusive societies, so how to get marginalized youth, people that aren't involved in EU policies, more involved in it. Fourth, in terms of information and constructive dialogues, so that's particularly about digital literacy skills, making sure people know about fake news, etc. Fifth, mental health and well-being, so fighting stigma about mental health, particularly around mental health issues, but specifically affect young people. Six, rural youth, so involving, again, people that aren't so involved haven't been so involved in EU programs before. Seventh, quality employment. Eighth, quality learning. I think they're kind of self-explanatory. Ninth, space and participation for all. Slightly bizarre title, but again, it's about democratic processes, but also about physical space, making sure that young people have areas where they can go, and actually use. 10th, and sustainable green Europe, again, part of green policy. And 11th, about youth organisations and EU projects, making sure that there's kind of this official youth engagement in EU policies. On top of this, there's a few new things about this strategy that's different to previous ones. So firstly, there's now going to be a youth coordinator based within the European Commission who's meant to kind of make sure that European youth voice is heard in decision making. There's also going to be a renewed youth dialogue, so every 18 months we're going to make sure and try and keep this discussion element going to make sure that young people are still involved in it. And also there's going to be a tracking of EU spending for youth, so actually making sure that the promises are made are actually followed when it comes to money, where it matters. So what I see as the positives about this, as I say, I actually wasn't involved in drafting this, so just to give a little bit of my own take on it. I think one, the focus on mental health is very positive. I think this is an important element. It hasn't been a kind of particular focus of previous strategies, so I think that's very positive. As well, this focus on rural areas and marginalized groups. I'm from a rural area myself, so I kind of feel that often somewhat overlooked in EU projects. So secondly, I think a second positive, it's been endorsed at a very high level. Okay, I'm running out of time. Secondly, it's been endorsed at a very high level. I think that's positive. And third, I think this role of the youth coordinator could be interesting if it's used effectively. For me, the big negative and the big concern about it is very often when it comes to youth in Europe and youth in national policy making, everyone talks a very good game. Everyone says, we're going to be different, we're going to fund one thing. Then when it actually comes down to it, young people are the first people to be overlooked and the first people to be screwed over. I think the perfect example of this is the last youth strategy for the EU was adopted in 2010. What happened over the next 8 years? Well, young people were completely screwed over across Europe. I think they were massively overlooked. They were worst affected by austerity in a lot of places. All the nice words about youth employment and stuff like that was completely ignored, and they were the first people to be hit and the first people to be affected by the changes in the labour market. So I think that what now needs to happen is young people actually need to hold, young people need to hold leaders to account and actually make sure they live up to the promises of the thing. All right, I'm already a minute over, so I had some more stuff to say, but I'll stop it there and I will leave it for the discussion. So thank you very much.
Very disciplined, thanks Tim. And I will now move on to Alba, so that we have this more institutional perspective at first, and then we move to a more bottom-up approach in that. Alba, you will speak us about, will tell us about stories about youth and security. So you have the floor. Thanks.
Oh, okay, that was better. Thank you, Youth Alliance of Kruševo, for this kind invitation. I'm very happy to address you today. Well, I hope I'll do as good as my previous colleague in time management, but I cannot promise that, because I think that 5 minutes will be spent on explaining what OSCE is and what my role exactly is. So I don't know how many of you are actually familiar with the OSCE. Pretty much? Okay. Well, just for those that are not so familiar, OSCE stands for the Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe. It's the second biggest, the first regional organization recognized by the UN as the biggest one under Chapter 7, and actually comprises 57 member states, covering the geographical area from Vladivostok to Vancouver, so like Canada to Russia. So you can already see that there is actually a great variety of participating states with their own interests, and also cooperating in different levels. And here I can mention the three main dimensions of OSCE, the first one being a military and political dimension, so more focused on security, and here is where also the role of youth is being recognized more within the OSCE. The second one being on economic and environmental dimension, and the third one on human dimension. However, what I would like to actually raise awareness on is also on the fact that OSCE is as complex as the EU, for those not so familiar with international organizations. So, for instance, my role as OSCE Youth Special Representative on Youth and Security is actually a role within the Slovak chairmanship, which functions in a way as a troika, like the presidency of the Council of European Union. But here it's actually for 1 year, and there are 3 countries Gabriele. So basically, my role within the chairmanship is to be the youth voice. So to raise awareness at the diplomatic level of the meetings on these 3 dimensions of the youth perspective, on how there can be a better job in incorporating the youth lens, or how to be more sensitive to the youth needs, and to draw solutions that are actually in line addressing the problems that the youth of today has. Without going further into that, I'm very pleased that the Slovak chairmanship is actually very active and very confident in promoting youth engagement, and the fact that they decided to have two special representatives on youth and security. It's a good news in having more activities engaging youth, and also helping mainstream the youth perspective within the institutional structure of the OSCE. However, focusing more on the topic of today's panel, on youth of today, I want to also bring some statistics, like in numbers, where are we today, what is the youth engagement, and that being seen through the lens of the political participation. Unfortunately, when we talk about political participation, the immediate thing, especially in the Balkans, by the way, I'm from Albania, so the immediate thing that comes to our mind is the political engagement through political parties. However, this is a misperception, because political participation is way bigger than that. For instance, an ODIHR research done in 2014 after consulting a big group of young women and men coming from the OSCE area, recognized 3 ways how young people can participate politically. And that is, for instance, informal way, which is also being said as voice. For instance, what we're doing today, like talking to each other and also networking or sharing social media. It can be semi-formal, which is a way of like influence, like youth NGOs do or lobbyist group on the youth interests. And it can be also governmental or formal, the way that we're more familiar with, like voting whenever we're having elections or participating in referenda, etc. However, what we're seeing today is that young political participation is dropping. We're having a background of more freedoms, of more democracies all around the globe. However, this political participation is not being reflected via the youth engagement. And this is actually very sad to see because young people are failing to translate their interest into the representation level. So, for instance, if we have other older generation participating in elections or in the formal way of political participation, that means that their interest will actually be reflected more in the decisions taken afterwards. So my point today would be to actually want to raise awareness on types of political participation of what I just said, and also explain to you the need for formal participation. And that brings me to the next point. For instance, nowadays we have 2% of world's parliaments under 30. So only like 2% of the parliaments all over the world have people aged under 30. And out of that 2%, only 2.2% are young women. So you can imagine the statistics of young women participating in political decision making. And that compared to 1.8 billion young people in the world nowadays. So it's quite dramatic that our political participation is at such level, at the formal level. Only the Nordic countries is actually performing better, with 10% of people under 30 participating in parliaments. Another, for instance, statistic is that the global proportion of MPs has risen only 0.3% since 2016. And that is also a worrying trend. So if we want to actually have our interests and have our voice being articulated, we need to take the floor. And we need to lobby to take the floor, because most of the time, as I'm realizing, is actually very difficult to be granted that space. So that would be, for instance, the formal participation, but just by the fact that this statistics were drawn by an NGO, Interparliamentary Union, this is also an articulation of semi-formal political participation. So what youth NGOs are doing now, for instance, this conference today, is a semi-formal political participation, and I want to draw attention to that, on how important it is to engage young people in this process. For instance, other statistics coming closer to the region are coming from an Albanian NGO, which is the Civic Resistance, and they drew attention to the fact that 70.8% of young Albanians have never voted before, and 24 of them not wanting to vote in the next elections, and 70% not being convinced if they want to vote. That coming in a way because of the fact that actually 63.8% of them claims that politics at the national and local levels has not delivered on youth policies. So that in a way tells us that youth is not happy with the current situation, but actually they're neither taking the floor to change the situation. And we need to do something about that. And that's why I just want to state like few reasons why we need to do that, and then I promise I'll cut it, and then we can continue with questions, and I'd be happy to provide some more input. For instance, what I found interesting in the ODIHR research was the fact that For instance, of course, we know that political participation of young people in referendums and in voting is also an articulation and a precondition for democratic polity. So that recognizes the fact that we need to have pluralism in our societies. But also what is interesting is that voting is also an educational process, so capacity building among the citizens, because you have this whole campaigns on educating the public and especially the youngsters on the process itself and in the importance of the process. Also, the process is a guardian of fundamental freedom, so unless you exercise this civic right and duty, I would say as well, then the chances that you have deterioration of other freedoms are most likely, as we can see now in some countries. Also, as I mentioned before, participating on the political level through formal or semi-formal levels is also promoting your interest as a target group. So none of the other target groups of the society will promote your interest as a young person unless you do so. Or at least it's less likely than when you do it yourself. The other reason is that what I found very interesting is that as well is the fact that political participation provides goods and services that neither the government or the market will provide. And that means, for instance, what youth NGOs are doing, for instance, the March for Climate Strike, what other protests or other youth initiatives articulating their interests are doing. I'm sorry if it was a bit academic and loaded with statistics, but I think it's very important to stress the urgency of young people recognizing the situation and also acting on it. So, yeah.
Thank you, Alba. No, actually, I felt there was interest about the data you mentioned, because I used that chance to recall that there is a Slido screen over there, so you are all invited, if possible not using anonymous handles, to interact with what is said on stage. And actually, one recurring question there, I was keeping track on that on my phone, was where do you derive those data from? So how can we access those data you mentioned? I saw in the room there was quite interest about that. So if you can just briefly tell us where we can find those figures?
So for instance, the ones on the participation of young people in parliaments is coming from Inter-Parliamentary Union, report done in 2018. The articulation of the three main types of political participation is coming from an ODIHR report in 2014 after the OSCE Youth Forum. Yeah, and then the statistics from Albania is coming from the Civic Qendresa Qytetare is their name in Albanian, and how would you translate it? Civic Resistance Organization in Albania, statistics drawn from a research in 2019.
Yeah, as you very well pointed out, actually OSCE having on board so many countries, 57? Yeah, and really goes from Vladivostok to Vancouver. So we have here more general also numbers than those that then we can also narrow it down and tailor that to the region itself when we will move to the study that was conducted by Marija later on. But then as you were speaking really about also youth activism and the role of young people, you mentioned the climate strike, that we will have a lot of time this afternoon with the panel that will focus on climate change and again the role of youth in the climate strike and in the Fridays for Future and so on and so forth. But you mentioned activism several times, and you mentioned also young people and young youth organizations being involved in the process that led to the EU Youth Strategy. So wait no more. Now we will move then to those who really are the voice that are empowered in those forums. Then I will move first to Aida, that will tell us about what she does in Bosnia and Herzegovina as a grassroots local activist and community leader, if I may say so also. Thank you, Aida, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Gabrielle, for introduction, and thank you, Bilan, I would say, for inviting me and having me here. So my name is Aida Brdar, and I'm coming from Sarajevo, Bosnia and Herzegovina. And today, I'm supposed to speak about solidarity activism here. I was thinking how to start, and in these 5 minutes I have here, I prefer to start like when was my first activist project or activity. It was like when I was 9 years old. I did like with other 50 kids from the school, Peace March. And that was just before war started in Bosnia and Herzegovina. We just felt like, okay, something's happening, we are not going to school anymore, we need to do something. So we did it. Unfortunately, war happened, but that feeling of helplessness actually drove me through all of these years to do this community activism, peace work, youth work, and today I'm officially like have diploma of social worker. So I've been working officially for NARKO-NE youth organization based in Sarajevo for, I don't know, now I think 8 years, and all of our projects are community-based projects. And we do it like in a way that we go to the community to do community assessment, to ask people what they need, to ask young people what they want, and based on their needs, we are developing projects. What's the key of those projects? Those are not like short-term projects, and that's really important to have long-term projects to try to make some change. After like maybe 1 year of implementation, we are going back to the community and ask them again if that something's happened, like what was the change, what they need like as a follow-up. And based on that feedback, we are going further. So after maybe few years of developing and implementing projects, we are writing policy recommendations and going to the policy decision makers to lobby for change on the policy level. So that's how actually we include ourselves in youth strategy or like different policies in the government on policy level. In Bosnia and Herzegovina is completely, it's a little bit complicated to do it, but we are trying. That's why it's actually the best ways to do it, like from the community level, like step by step. So after all of these years of working as a community worker and youth worker, I would always say, like yesterday, somebody said like there are key competencies what young person has to supposed to have for like a good job. And I was like, okay, who did it? Who wrote these competencies? And I really like the girl that she says like, I prefer to have and I think it's really important to have empathy. And that's something that I really prefer. So after all of these years, I have never been without a job. And I grew up in Bosnia, like the highest percentage of jobless. Somehow it happened that I have a job, I create my job. And after, yeah, as I said, like through all of these years, I just, I could say the 4 characteristics, core characteristics of solidarity activism and community work are empathy, communication, adjustability, and consistency. So once I actually have heard that nowadays the most important competence or skill for young people that they have to need, like they have to be able to adjust to new surroundings, new environment when they work, when they start a new job. So when you work in the community directly with people, you have to learn how to be adjustable. You have to learn how to feel empathy, to be compassion, and to develop a good way of communication. I would just maybe, yeah. So like, just want to add that NARKO-NE is a local organization. We through all of these are projects, like in the last 15 or 17 years. We have each year 200 people involved in our projects, but voluntary based. All of them are just volunteers, and they believe in the work we do, and they really like feel that they are very useful. The community need them, and they are making changes. So I think like solidarity activism could be, or youth work and community work could be like first step, and has to be the first step if you want to make a change. So yeah, I think 5 minutes I used. So I'm looking forward to see you later, because I've always preferred to start in a way to ask people what they want to hear, what they want to do, and then together to figure out what we could recommend to policymakers for a change. Thank you very much.
You're extremely disciplined when it comes to the 5 minutes deadline. Actually, something that I was asking myself where I was speaking, and I think some others might have thought as well about that. Who in terms of political representatives, political institutions, who supports you? I mean, your daily work in what you do.
First of all, like when we are making projects and developing projects, we always try to include partly municipalities, like very first stage of political system, and then together with them, like it could be sometimes only like police, or could be like public institutions, and they always give us like good recommendations what to do, like what could be next step, because they're part of the community. On the other hand, youth voice is very important. Youth are like 1 year, they're only child, like you're like 13 or 12 or 10. You feel like you're a child, you want to play on the playground, and next day you're kind of an adult. And everyone asks you to do something and to behave like responsible or whatever. And it's really important to include like schools, police, municipality, like key stakeholders, to help to listen each other, like to have dialogue between them, and then to develop like and move forward.
And you mentioned school, and I recall you mentioned school while we were talking on the way to Kruševo as one of the projects you are mostly proud of also in your work. And I will use that chance also to bring a question from the audience on Slido, which is if you can, which regards some examples of your work that you consider did the biggest impact in your community. If you can mention then a couple, maybe starting from the school then.
Okay. So I would just say like few maybe things, or maybe I will start with one project that I'm the most proud of. It's like intercity theater project that we've been doing like for the last 13 years. So in Bosnia and Herzegovina, we have really, really divided communities in sense of ethnicity and religion. So we have so-called 2 schools under one roof. And young people, they don't have even chance to meet each other during the school time. So, and they live in the same community. So we, each year we engage them and train them for addiction prevention and health promotion. We're not speaking about peace building at all, otherwise they wouldn't be able to join us, because their parents, they think they don't need it. Who needs peace building activity or reconciliation, because we're not in conflict? That's like attitude of the parents. And then we ask school to collaborate, to engage young people through our activities. So after only 7 days spending in the woods without internet, without, like it's like youth camp, you know that. without any equipment, without any distraction. They just meet each other and they develop together workshops for work with citizens in community. They develop like theater play. With that theater play, they just trigger people to talk about the main issues within community. And after that, they do workshops to provide more information regarding like what community needs, what they could do, what change they would love to do. And together with audience, they are making recommendations. That's like the last part of the program. With those recommendations, we do, we act like, we collect them, and then to go to talk to policy decision makers, what could be the next step. For us, the big success is to make these people to communicate to each other, to work together, and to contribute to their community, like really together, and to develop themselves and the self-confidence to talk out loud about issues they are dealing with each day. That's like only one project that we do. Like, as I said, consistency is very, very important. So this project we do like in the past 13 years, and this was one of the projects that they're like got the prize from European Commission in 2016, like as a most successful project in this field.
Thank you. Indeed, thank you for sharing also some more concrete examples that I'm sure will inspire participants in their policy drafting later on today. And now other inputs regarding youth activism and role of young people also in the region. You know him well by now, because Josip has been with us already the past few days in Kruševo, but today he's on panel and he will speak about what he does in his community and how he tackles, and his football club tackles, association or club, sorry, was club, thank you, tackles prejudices in society. And just one piece of information for you, if you please could refrain from taking pictures of the presentation that will now be screened there. And Josip, you have the floor. Thank you.
People leave. I'm part of a football club, although I don't like football, because anti. Nazi insignia. You can here see Croatian away game forming swastika from their bodies. You can see often in Croatia messages directed to the Serbs, especially Serbian civilians that died during the war, On the other hand, in Serbia, you can see burning of Albanian flag or Croatian flag. You can see Chetnik leaders on the photos, or in Croatia, Ustaša leaders. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, depending on maybe it was too hard for someone. Depending on which part of the Bosnia you are, if there are more Croats, then you can maybe see more Ustaša insignia. For example, in part of where there are more Serbs, you can see this kind of messages. Macedonia is not much different. You can also see, that's the top right photo, worldwide white power. You can see here in Montenegro messages like Kosovo is Serbia, or the also worldwide white power. And then there is us with a terrible name for our fan group, which is White Angels Zagreb, which sounds like a name for a really racist group. But the thing is, the crest, the colors of the club are white, and the worst fan group in Zagreb is Bad Blue Boys, so this is kind of White Angels, so kind of something different. You can see the banner, for example, here, Football Fans Against Homophobia, which is Europe-wide network, FARA network, which is promoting fighting against discrimination on stadiums. And in 1 week in November, there are different, all over Europe, there are different messages, and we are the only one on in this part of the Europe that is actually participating at that. Club was formed in 2014. He started competing in 2015. We are still in the same last league where we started. A lot of people don't care really about it. I mean the sports side of the sports success side. What is important for us, for example, is to take part in the solidarity march for the against the violence over the refugees, or players wearing T-shirts that are part of the campaign to collect money for building the shelter for women who experienced violence from their partners. We have women capo. Capo is the person who is sitting usually on the stands, turned their back toward the field, actually looking at the fans and naming the next song and giving the sign when to light the flare, who's going to wave the flag or something. This is maybe also a good example from our merch shoot. These are different people. We have here the person who is sticking out due to his skin color is Sadu, who is an asylum seeker who came to Croatia from Senegal. He got asylum and he played for our club for 2 years. These are other volunteers. So in the statue and in the messages, but also actually in the field. Our women's team started and is so far now playing just it's called futsal, so 5-on-5 in the closed gym, not on the open pitch. This is, I think, their first or second game in Cup, and I think this is the fastest growing part of the club. They started with 8 or 9 girls. In the last 3 years, more than 50 girls joined the club. Some of them just for the practice, some of them just for the fun of it. Some of them really in love with football and love to playing it. And I can say they are definitely most successful part of the club. They won a couple of small tournaments. Also, what can be important for some is the football. Important part of the club are football fans. They are the ones who started the club. The club is much more than them, but they do also play a crucial part. And this is something I think which is really important, especially unfortunately in our region. And these are examples that you can be ultras fan, you can be on the stands for 90 minutes, you can yell your throat off, you can light flares, you can be a proper crazy football fan and still not be chauvinistic, not be homophobic, not be racist, not be a terrible person to the people around you. you may see me on some of the photos. We will not talk about it. Yeah, we are lighting flares, we are waving with flags, we have messages of fighting against discrimination. We, as in other stadiums, we comment on what is happening in the society, but when there is a conflict, for example, when there is ignition of hate, for example, towards the refugees, unlike other stadiums where you see death threats and messages like "Go back to Africa," we try to respond with positive messages, with messages of solidarity, of refugees welcome, and similar. Who are the people around the club? This is lowest bottom club. There is no one is paid, not the players, not the coaches, definitely not anyone from. We don't have president, we don't have general secretary or something. We just have general assembly, and we have all kinds of people in the stands. We have punks, we have asylum seekers, we have people bringing children, which is for us really important. That, and they say to us that they finally feel it's the only stadium where they feel completely safe to come with their children. We have we often try to have some kind of interaction on the stands also. Here on the left picture you can see Bongo, who is also asylum seeker, asylum grantee, who is teaching young kids to lead, to drum, to help us cheer in the games. And yeah, why I asked you not to take photos of presentation is because, as you can probably guess, not everyone is really happy what we are doing. There is, for the most of the time, it was just Facebook threats. You know, people are sending messages. Excuse my French, but I have to be honest about this. Faggots, go fuck yourself. Your place is not in the football. Leave our country and stuff like that. We had also a couple of physical threats. People coming to the game with hammer, with pepper spray. One guy came with knife. Luckily, there was never a conflict. The only casualty was that one of our banners got stolen. But yeah, I don't like to, I mean, no one in the club likes to have photos of us presented online. So if you visit, for example, our Facebook page or our web page, you will usually just see wide photos from the opposite side, so they cannot recognize our faces. But what really frustrates us is that we also lack institutional support. Football Association of Croatia and Football Association of Zagreb, as our city, doesn't see this as something really important. For them, we are just, you know, another club. We had a couple of initiatives, for example, because we have stupid rules that are applied even to children, of number of foreigners you can have in your team, and we try to pass that asylum seekers are not considered foreigners when registering as a kid to play for a club. We are still waiting for an answer on that. We try to ask them to move the limit during which kids, boys and girls can play together. We're also still waiting on it. There are some problems, of course, with this kind of enthusiasm. It's hard to continue this doing for long. We have rather large number of members because people from, we have members from USA, Canada, Germany, Brazil even. But in Croatia, you know, it's all voluntary. It's a lot of things to do, from things that you may not even connected with, like washing the jerseys after the game. But also, you know, coming to the game, we try to always make a meal for the home games and stuff like that. It's a lot of work, and usually the members are the activists themselves, employed people who don't often have time to, you know, take their weekends off to participate in this, and this is something that we are facing and trying to solve. For the end of this emotional roller coaster, like a proper good ending, it has to be emotional, and this club is at the same time reason why I stayed and the reason why I want to leave, because being part of this club I figure out how deep and how bad the situation is. And to remind you, I'm living in the capital of the EU country, and we are still facing this kind of problems. But I want to share with you the letter club received last week. The oldest member of our club died about 10 days ago. His son has been living for a long time in the United States, and he sent us a letter in which he said, "My father often talked with me about your club and what you do. I know this whole thing meant a lot to him. He was always so happy when he was doing something for the club, not just going to the games, but also talking about club presence on social networks or just going to the meetings." By the way, the guy he's talking about was running our Twitter, although he was 68 or something, so really age is not limit for Twitter. He would often send me pictures after the games and was really happy that the club was based on non-discrimination, self-governance and participation. It was aligned with his ideology. He was combating depression his whole life, and I know for certain that your club made him happy the last 3 years, and I want to thank you for what you do and continue to do. These kind of messages really push us to keep fighting, to not just this, but also the fact that we know that we are fighting for something good. But at the same time, you know, to walk around the streets and to know, for example, that if you wear a shirt that says love football, hate racism, that you can get beaten up, is also a fact that plays a big part in why am I still standing here and why there is no that amount of money or paycheck or stability of a job that can sometimes, you know, keep you in this place. And I'm sorry to be brutal, but my message from here is either do something really great or leave. Maybe that's not the best message, but it's maybe my own personal opinion. And yeah, if you're staying, you can also support us, join us. If you ever come to Zagreb, hit me up, come to the game. It's really not that much about football, but if you're a football fan, you will have a good time. Thank you.
And indeed, thanks, Josip, not only for your presentation, but also for what you do in Zagreb, in your local community, in the way you actually also proved that sport not always is a toxic environment where to be and where to be yourself also. And I actually have, there was a question also mentioned by the audience on Slido. Do you, like for example, take part in those anti-racist World Cups and those championships that, for example, I know, and it was mentioned also there, Italy hosts some of them. So how do you also see your role in this more supranational stage?
Yeah, we haven't for the last couple of years, but the fans were at Mondiale Antirasisti. We have great partnerships with clubs and football fans from especially Germany, around Berlin, Babelsberg, Glasgow United, clubs with similar story. They really like us, and it's sometimes a bit of patronizing. It's not on purpose, but you know, for them this sounds like wild, wild west, and we are like for them some shining light. And sometimes for them, you know, it's hard to imagine what it actually is to, you know, to live in this kind of surrounding. But yeah, we are participating in anti-racist, anti-fascist tournaments around Europe. Most notably, like the ones closer to us in Slovakia, there's a great tournament in Trenčín, in Babelsberg, that's near Potsdam or in Potsdam. Also, a few years ago in Hamburg, in St. Pauli, the most famous anti-fascist club. So yeah, these kind of things, yeah. And we often try actually to send fans, members of the club, women's team, someone that is not actually a football player.
Talking about women's teams, I saw that Alba was very much rooting for that. Also, when you mentioned the capo, yes, in your club, and I think you have a comment to that. I just please 30-40 seconds. Thank you.
Very briefly. Thank you very much for this presentation, Josip. I want to explain two things. The first one, when I didn't have the time to explain the nexus between security and political participation, and Josip's example is the perfect one for that. For instance, his political participation in the stadiums to fight hate speech and to fight all this discrimination that surrounds the environment is actually making the environment safer. For instance, women or other parts of the society that so far haven't had access to this specific environment and to this hobby just because the environment is not safe. So your immediate action actually translates into a safer environment for the rest of the society, specifically youngsters. And the second comment that I had is also making reference to what I explained to you of informal, semi-formal, and formal political participation. This is actually one of the cases of informal political participation. So whatever you do is political participation as long as you act.
Thank you, and we see the joint venture between OSCE and Zagreb 041 then here. That's very, very nice to see, and also usually people tell us that inclusion and security are two different things we cannot really reconcile, but then in this case we see that we prove them wrong. And now it's time to move to the last speaker of the panel, so to the last introductory speech of the panel. I'm sure you have seen it in the room, so just here in the hall before the meeting room. This is the study that was conducted by the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, so by FES, who's a partner and co-organizer of this International Youth Conference in Kruševo for a long time now. And this is a study that has been conducted with a focus on 10 countries of Southeast Europe. And I will leave now the floor to Marija to tell us a bit more about evidences and figures from the study and how we can move on from them to better do policy making in the region. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, this? Yes. Good morning to everyone. I was the research coordinator and the leading author of the Macedonian Youth Study in 2013 and also last year in 2018. But today I will present on behalf of Friedrich Ebert Foundation the regional youth study, which contains all the data and analysis from the 10 national research studies conducted in the Southeast Europe region. You can see on this slide, this is the official website of Friedrich Ebert Foundation, where you can easily download simply by clicking on each of the country the national research studies. The research question was divided in several thematic sections. So I will begin now with the education, but in the interest of time, I will present only the most interesting and important research findings, because really there is a sea or ocean of data and results. Youth from Southeast Europe region have high aspirations towards education. They are not very satisfied with the quality of education in their country, except maybe in Bulgaria and Bosnia and Herzegovina and Slovenia. The perception of adaptation of the education system to the work demands, the perception about this question of the young people is that the educational syllabuses or curricula are not well adapted to the work demands, which means that the educational institutions and the universities and the business sector companies must have stronger collaboration. Young people suffer from anxiety about not having a job. As you can see, these percentages are highest in Macedonia, Croatia, Albania, Slovenia, and Serbia, but for all the countries also the percentage is very high. Young people prefer to work in the public sector, especially in Kosovo with 70%, in Bosnia and Herzegovina with also 70%, Serbia 50%, Albania also 50%, etc. The situation is different in Slovenia, Bulgaria, and Romania. Young people were asked to rank the factors which they consider as most important for finding a job. So the factors that were chosen are connection with people in power positions. That if you want to have a job, you must know someone who is in a high position. In the non-European countries, young people think that also, to find a job, you must have a political party membership. The situation is not like this in the countries that are already EU members. The factors as education and expertise were on the last rank, which is very interesting. Young people, they don't appreciate the values, as you said, the values of political and civic engagement. The mean value is 2, which is in the negative interval of the axis. So we think that we can say that this is not important. For them, most valued values are those for autonomy and responsibility, family values, and values of personal success. The main anxieties of youth, entire phase youth studies, are that they are frightened by the high levels of corruption, the increasing poverty in society, social injustice, having no job, getting seriously ill, and the air pollution and climate change. The general satisfaction with democracy in the home country, from this slide you can see that we can say that there is a general unsatisfaction with the democracy, except in Croatia, because only Croatia has a value 3, not under the 3, which is again in the negative interval of the axis. Young people don't trust anybody and each institution, so we can see from this slide that they don't trust at all to the political leaders, they don't trust the national governments, don't trust the local government, don't trust the civil society organization, don't trust the people with different political convictions, and they don't trust to their neighbors. They don't trust to no one. They only have trust in their close family members and close friends. They have high social distance. For example, they choose that they would like to be neighbors with big local family and retired couple more than students, homosexuals, prisoners, drug addicts, which are in the negative intervals. Young people give big support for the membership in the European Union by country. Only for Serbia, we have a low percentage of only 50, which supports the previous findings that there is Euroscepticism. Young people interest in national politics has dropped significantly, as you can see. So they are not generally interested in national politics, and that's why they are not. They don't have willingness to take on a political function. At least only in Macedonia, when we have a cumulative percentage of 50 almost, that they would like to have a political career. But in the other countries, the situation is not like this. Young people very rarely participate in voluntary activities. The percentage are high only in countries as Romania, Slovenia, and Serbia. In Albania, this percentage is very low, 18. In Bosnia, also 13. Bulgaria, 14, as I see, etc. About the mobility and migration, the countries that are not members of the European Union show higher desire for migration outside of the country, and they would like to stay long in the host country. The most desired host country is Germany. The reasons for migrations, as in all other research studies, are the economic factors, which are the main motives or drivers which trigger this kind of desire. When we talk about families and transition to adulthood, we can generally say that young people, their transition from adolescence to adulthood is a very difficult process and prolonged one. Mature young people over 18 years old, they still live with their parents in high percentage of 80%, for example, and that's why they usually make decisions, important decisions for their life together with their parents because of the financial dependency. You can see there are not many cases when young people accomplish the main key life events as they are completed education, independent housing, stable employment, cohabitation or marriage, or having a child. These percentages are very low. Young people in their free time, they do activities that are not organized or structured. So you can see mostly they are listening to music in their free time, spending time with the family, going out with their friends. The average hours per day that they spend on the internet are varying from 3 in Croatia to 6.5 in Montenegro and Macedonia. So this is very important information that if you want to reach these young people, the online platforms are a very good tool. What do they do on the internet? They usually are on the social networks like Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, LinkedIn. They communicate with their friends by Skype, WhatsApp, Viber, FaceTime, or they download or listen to music or getting some information for school, education, or work. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Marija. Something I recall from some numbers, some key figures. Well, here there is a lot you can be inspired with. So there you will find findings, key numbers, figures, as Marija was mentioning before, and also some policy recommendations from the study itself that can inspire your further discussion later today and this afternoon. So thank you for that. And now I think that with the, I'm just checking on Slido, sorry. Yes, and actually an important thing about Slido is that Blažen has published several links this morning. One of those is actually the link to the study on the website of FES, so you can also consult that online and download if you do not want to bring the study, the printed copy, back home with you. And as I see now, we have concluded our opening remarks and opening speeches. We have already had the chance to a bit engage in the discussion with our panelists, and I actually have to ask Tim a question that I didn't see and I skipped when that was posed here on Slido, and I oversaw it, so sorry for that. And it is somehow also linked to the presentation that was done before about young people then in the region, because when you were speaking about the youth strategy, and one of these questions, unfortunately, I don't have the name of the person who asked it, but what is the fate of Western Balkan countries after the process of the EU structured dialogue has become the EU Youth Dialogue? So how are the views of people from the region taken on board in EU policy making?
Yeah, well, I think people could possibly come in as well who probably have a better knowledge of, in terms of actually how the structured dialogue works. Yeah, I mean, perhaps actually might be a better person to answer.
Yeah, sure. I don't know if you are all aware, but Croatia is supposed to be the next presidency, or they're going to preside in the next 6 months, and we are part of the current trio. Unfortunately, there is no clear perspective of how to include the Western Balkans. There is in general, this is at least coming from what we do get informations from the ministers and stuff like that. I don't know what's going on in the Commission, but I know that, for example, in this current cycle, there was no to take on board the dialogue outside of the EU. Although we did ask for it, all the youth councils actually asked for it, who were part of it, but it never happened that much. Usually the response is that Croatia will have one of its priorities is going to be Western Balkans, so it's kind of, for them, it's like it's enough to talk about Western Balkan in that part. I don't know about the future of the EU dialogue, but then again, nobody knows exactly what's going to happen with the EU dialogue. Now they changed the name. This is pretty much the only substantial change that came. I think the important part is that through your national youth councils, or if you're part of international non-governmental youth organizations, you continue to push this forward to the European Youth Forum, the highest body representative of young people in Europe, non-governmental organization, because they are the partners with the European Commission on this, and they have probably the biggest power coming from the youth side to actually put this on table. And I know they are aware of it, but I think it never harms to do more pressure on them. So contact your national youth councils or some other youth organizations, and I think the faster way is to try to go to the European Youth Forum. I know this doesn't exactly solve or answer completely the question, but then, I mean, there is no, at least not aware to me, I'm not aware of the clear answer of what's the plan and perspective for the Western Balkans.
30-40 seconds again, Alba, please.
I don't know for the rest of the Western Balkans, but I know that in Albania, the EU delegation has actually initiated EU structured dialogue with the youth, and they're gathering opinions on how to further structure the dialogue and to incorporate youth views on the integration process of Albania. So maybe this is also a tool on how to mainstream the perspective on EU integration.
Super, thank you. And while Blažen is spamming us with yet another link, this time to the European Youth Forum. Thanks, Blažen, for that. Actually, on Slido, and we got a couple of questions from Marija, and about the study that, again, I show you. It's here. There are key figures, key policy recommendations you can use this afternoon in your discussions. And one of that I will post myself because it's by an anonymous, but then I will take the chance to move to the audience because the second one has actually a name. The first one, and again as a key word for our discussions these days, has been partnership and dialogue then with communities. How did you collect the data? And have you been then, I mean, besides the survey, has there been any other meeting with relevant institutions in the countries and in the region?
Okay, well, the research methodology for this project was standardized and unique for all 10 countries. So we followed the research methodology strictly in 100% at same all countries. The data from the respondents for the quantitative data was collected by CAPI, Computer Assisted Program Survey, with tablets, with over 1,000 of respondents. Also, the qualitative data was collected by 10 interviews per country, again with the young people, with typical representatives of the young people. So interviews or focus group with institutions, with representatives of institutions, they were not collected during this project.
Thank you for clarifying upon that. And now we can move actually to the audience because I see that Violet asked a question on Slido, but then better chance to then empower directly her voice so that she can ask the question herself.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Need
Hello.
diversity of voices then.
My name is Nino. I'm from Croatia.
I see that's clearly not Violet, but okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
Okay. So regarding the EU youth strategy, so now we are talking about the structured dialogue and all this stuff, but I'm also interested, like, are there any mechanisms of quality implementation of EU youth strategy within the countries? And also, to put it also, to have quality implementation at the local level. So who should be the stakeholders who will also implement and as well as monitor the recommendations that are within EU youth strategy? It could be a question for Mr. Timothy, but also for Josip as well.
Thank you. And shall we collect a couple more questions so that then we have a variety of topics to discuss on panel? And I see Ola. A second. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the discussion. I'm Oliana from Albania. Actually, I don't know if I fit anymore to youth, according to Council of Europe definition, but according to some other definitions, I'm still in the target group. Anyway, I work with young people every day. So my question is that when I listened to all your discussions, they were from a different point of view. We started with political participation, then about community and service engagement, then we had this kind of awareness about what it is hate speech, how to be more responsible. It is my read of your speech, sorry. And then we ended up with the resume of your survey. What I realize working with young people every day in our region is that we have really a cultural problem. We are not out of transition. I mean, the transition of values that we assume that it passed, it doesn't pass, unfortunately. I have to be very frank, maybe. So if our problem is cultural, how to tackle it? Because I see that this survey, maybe if we made it 10 years ago or 20 years ago or even 30 when the wall of Berlin fell, just we would have missed this part of social media and internet that people are connected. Then the rest is pretty more or less the same. I'm being very basic. Another thing is that, okay, we are speaking about political participation, but what it is missing really in our region is civic engagement. And not only civic engagement, but civic awareness. I mean, we are not educating citizens. I'm sorry to say I'm inside the higher education system. I work every day and I see that really we are not educating citizens. We are not preparing citizens. So maybe your comment or your point of view on how to do that, or from your work, how it is better and how to face that. And in a more general European level, for instance, I know that Council of Europe is having some struggle and they wanted to cut the youth department. As far as I know, as far as I remember, they had some kind of budget issues on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, I sense there are a lot of topics already. Maybe we can stop interventions from the public for now, at least, and then we move to the speakers for reacting to that. Tim, would you like to take the lead, or Josip? I don't know.
Yeah, maybe I talk very briefly from the kind of EU perspective, within the Commission, within the Parliament, where I am, etc. And maybe just touch into the questions, and then for the more local level, maybe you can come in.
Okay, thank you.
So yeah, in terms of actually how this strategy is going to be implemented, so this one of these big new proposals that they're selling with this strategy is this new youth coordinator who's going to be based in the European Commission, and is a person who's going to be tasked basically with making sure that this actually works and these things are actually taken into account with how it goes. How that's going to work in practice is there's going to be a new DG, new department in the Commission for Youth and Innovation is the current name, although this is still being finalized, and it's the Bulgarian Commissioner, Gabriel, who's in charge of it. So this person is apparently going to have a staff and going to have a budget to actually make sure this is implemented. In practice, I'm interested to see how it works, and if this vision has a serious responsibility of doing it, because too often I think this is true at a local level, at a national level, at an EU level, these things kind of fall by the wayside as soon as other things come up. I mean, as I said in the introductory remarks, and I think the comment you just made there exactly, the point is when budgets start being cut, when belts start being tightened, youth policy is normally always at the top of the list if something's cut. And that's the thing that has to change, because otherwise all this stuff is pointless. Because, if actually you can have the best ideas, the best strategy in the world, but 2 years down the line there's another economic crisis and all the projects are cut and ruined and no thought through and no strategy for it, then the whole thing is for absolutely nothing. So I hope that it's different this time, but this person, this new youth coordinator, is given a serious role, that within the structure of the commission as a whole, the youth and innovation portfolio is actually, given some real power and given some real budget behind it to do something. But we're going to have to see. And what it also takes is constant pressure from the outside to actually make sure that they live up to it. And actually from youth organizations, from things, that's what makes a difference in the long run, is actually making politicians, making authorities understand that there is consequences if they start cutting youth programs, etc. So I don't know, those would be my general comments on the two things, perhaps on the local level of actually how the programs work. You two are in a better place to comment.
Yeah, that's actually that is the thing. It comes back to the political will or to the pressure, especially on the local level. So far, the youth policy is soft policy. That means there is no obligation actually, and there is no punishment and there is no line of like making it the same in all the countries. So every country is responsible for its own youth policy. It may not function as well in maybe in some of our countries where there is no developed political culture and in general perspective what is actually youth policy. You as individuals, unfortunately, in this area are not that powerful as we are supposed to be, especially as the young people. Most you can do is actually to sit on their backs and to kick out of the office people who don't promote. There is, especially on the local level, there is not much that European Union can do if your mayor completely ignores the youth policy. That's unfortunately completely only on you. I know it's not very optimistic in perspective, but it is true. I mean, the change can only be done by pressure, or if there is political will, of course, then education, youth policy and stuff like that, especially education of officials, of policymakers. But in that part, the big role plays the youth organizations.
Else wishing to comment briefly? Thank you.
Yeah, I realize that. I wanted to comment on the civic education problem and having it as a cultural problem as well. I've been pointing out to this fact for a long time that we're missing the civic education part in our curricula overall in the Balkans. However, when I was reading the ODIHR research report on how to engage young people, I was realizing that actually in the 21st century, we have so many options and solutions additionally to our educational systems that actually we should not just wait on that or be dependent on that. For instance, we can capitalize on the technology and on the information available there, or engage in social media with youth organizations or other informal groups or other initiatives like Josip's. This is also civic education, and it's not only dependent on our educational system. So there are many ways on how we can actually learn ourselves or empower other young women and men to be more active citizens and to give the basics of what civic education is. So it's not just how our school system works, it's also a lot of extracurricular activities and other initiatives like youth NGOs or informal groups. So there is a way out of this.
Thank you all for your comments. Actually, I will now do something that Blažen has been doing on Slido up until now. That is, there has been an acronym Alba has been mentioning several times today, which is ODIHR. ODIHR is the office within OSCE for human rights and democratic institutions. So have a look also at their website for reports also on the health of democracy in the OSCE countries and human rights in countries of the organization, and also beyond the organization, actually, not only.
Might be very familiar of ODIHR electoral monitoring system. So ODIHR is an independent body within the OSCE, and they focus, as Gabriela said, on human rights and democratic processes, and a strong focus on youth and gender. So if you're looking for statistics, again, you can have a look at their website.
And thank you. And now I will read two further comments that are on Slido. Yes, sorry, yeah, they're here. And one was actually a thank you note for the speakers. Wait. Thank you for inspiring and concrete examples. It is important to think about strategies, to advocate and plan big, but we need more concrete examples like those Aida and Josip shared. To share it, to make it more visible, to inspire and to connect. Thank you again. And that is from Branimira. And the comments I was referring to before, it's a comment to the methodology just something regarding the methodology of this study that was conducted. And the comment says, I read it, I find it strange to still have a key life event denominated marriage used to address independency of youth. Is it coming from research conducted before, or can you tell us a bit about the marriage category that was employed in the study? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. It was our dilemma also, to be honest, because this theory for life transition is an old theory in the sociology from 70s or maybe earlier. But as I said, we didn't have a possibility to intervene in the research questionnaire. So the methodology authors, I guess, they decide that this is a nice way to measure the transition from adolescence to adulthood through these 5 key events, and it was marriage or cohabitation as an option. But I didn't discuss these findings because of the time. In this study, you can see that on the question, how do you imagine yourself in the future? For all 10 countries, the percentages that they imagine themselves, the young people, as married are 89, 90, 91. So this gives us input for us that most of the respondents still imagine themselves in marriage. I guess it's enough.
Thank you for clarifying that. And then we can move on to the audience again for further questions. And say one here, Anthony's over there, and back. So can start from here. Sorry.
Okay. Does this work? Yeah, I think yes. Hello everyone. My name is Ervila Osmanai, and I come from Albania. As we are talking about the topic youth of today, I would like to share some data about the situation of young people in Albania. This data came out from the National Survey Youth in Albania 2019, which was drafted by Albanian National Youth Network in cooperation with Children's Rights Center through a large consultation with young people in 61 municipalities of Albania, as well as it was shared an online survey with young people, with youth organizations, students, etc. The National Survey Youth in Albania have this data. About 89% of young people don't find any friendly environment in order to address their problems or to find a solution for their problems. They also express that the institutions, local institutions, municipalities, doesn't work very well on youth issues and youth rights. Also, 80% of young people are not employed in Albania, which is the major challenge in my country. Also, 55% of young people have experienced poverty, which is very sad data. When it comes to the political parties, 84% of young people say that political parties are not very open to solve the problems of young people, and 35% of young people say that political parties are not open to consult young people, and when they consult young people, it happens only during the electoral campaign. The budget in the municipalities of Albania, it is very low and it is not enough to solve the problems of young people, where 73% say that the budget, it is not enough, and also the budget in national level, which is allocated for young people, it is still not enough to solve their problems. Also, 70% of young people, or better to say more than 70% of young people, want to leave Albania and to find a job in another country of Europe because all these challenges that are facing. But I would like to say also that we don't have only problems, but we have also some results. Because of the limited time, I would like to share very briefly. In the local level, from 61 councillors in the City Council of Municipality of Albania, 24 councillors are young people, and this is a very good result. Also, in the last mandate, for the first time, 15 young people are MPs in the parliament. And the last point that I would like to share with you is that finally Albania will have its youth law, and hopefully will serve as a very good tool to regulate all the situation of young people. Thank you.
Thank you. And we move on to the other side of the room. Antonis, you have the floor.
Okay, yeah, I'm here. So, what?
Yeah,
we'll
collect questions from both of you, and then we move to the speakers.
Okay, thanks. So I have a question for team, because right after this panel we have some work to do with the participants, shaping new policy recommendations. So I'd like to use your input. Are you aware of any concrete ways that the EU youth strategy, the new one, has to address the youth and involve the youth of specifically the Southeast Europe countries, even though some of them are not EU member states? For example, I know that the structured dialogue, some of the countries, including this one, participated in the structured dialogue in their own way. Are there any concrete directions in that way, or does the new youth coordinator have any mandate regarding this region, or anything else that you can give as an input for us to take into account? Thank you.
And last question?
Actually, I have two questions, if you don't mind. The first one is, I was just thinking, and I wanted to hear your opinion on it, because in the region, especially in the Western Balkan region, we have few bodies and platforms for regional cooperation. So I was wondering, do you think that we also need some regional youth strategy, following the example of the EU youth strategy? And knowing the situation in the region, especially the political situation in the region, do you think that that kind of strategy would actually have a positive impact and would be implemented, or it would just stay as few pieces of paper and wish list maybe? So do you think that we need such strategy in the region, and is it possible that that kind of strategy to be implemented? And the second question would be, because some of the Western Balkan countries were part of the structural dialogue, as we mentioned before, and they're not really involved now in the EU youth dialogue, do you think that, having in mind that most of the Western Balkan countries are more or less on their way to EU integration, do you think that for the EU youth dialogue as concrete mechanism could somehow help the EU integration for the Western Balkan countries? And what kind of impact could it have on these processes?
Thank you. Can we maybe add also, and in that I would like to bring the two and we will, Aida and Josip, and maybe discuss about that also, the role of the Regional Youth Cooperation Council in your daily life as young activists in your countries, if you have any policy recommendation that can be then used by the participants to address also the National Parliament in North Macedonia. And wrapping up, you have several inputs, so who would like to start? Maybe Tim, just to, or yeah. I don't know, or Aida, as you are the one who spoke the last few minutes ago now.
Just quickly refer this last question, which you have asked about regional youth strategy. And I've heard youth strategy. Strategy is always something that exists. And the always question behind the strategy is who is going to implement that and who will monitor that's implemented in a good way. So I prefer not to wait for the strategy. And my recommendation for you today would be to put in your policy recommendations to do something that you are able to do from your position. Not to wait for political decision maker to do something for you, but to try to do something by yourself, and with these results, to go for recommendations. So, for example, it could be very easy, this is great opportunity for you, in these few days, to develop, some small, I don't know, proactive, activity or project, and that popped up to my mind instead of regional strategy to be regional solidarity award for the best example of solidarity activism in the Balkans or the region itself. Could be very good, and maybe can together find somebody who could support you, through small funds. And based on that, you can see after you implement that kind of project, then that could be opportunity to meet again. It's beautiful to have internet and all of these social medias, but I don't know, I became a little bit suspicious about it, because young people, you have a lot of information every single minute, 1,000 information in your pocket. It's really hard to make decision, what are you going for, to do something, to make priorities. So I always prefer to meet people, to talk to them directly. So maybe it would be a very good option for you to develop small activity project, whatever, and that could be good reason to meet again, to talk in person to each other, and to develop step by step. Strategies are good as a mission or a long-term vision, I would say, but if you want to make a change, you need, I prefer to start today, now, and with myself.
Thank you.
Sorry, it's not. It's not listed as one of the 11 key principles of actually involving it, which actually is a change from last time, where one of the 8 points was about youth in the wider world. So that's already quite an interesting point, but it hasn't been taken into consideration as one of these overarching things. In terms of policy recommendations, maybe one very good and very clear one is the Commission, everything in the EU is completely in flux at the moment. So people like this new youth coordinator aren't in place. Their exact role is very much being defined at the moment. So maybe in terms of recommendation, making sure that the opinions of this region are taken into account and are made aware of. So maybe that's one thing to target with the policy recommendations, looking at how, opinions of a region can be taken into account, making sure that enlargement and youth and enlargement is taken into account in this strategy when it's actually being implemented. So maybe that's an idea for a recommendation.
Sorry. Just maybe to counteract on this about the regional youth strategy, I think it's not a bad idea. Coming more as now as a political scientist than as an activist, because if you have a strategy, even if it's not implemented, you have something to advocate on, and you have something to call on, because if none of you are going to be politicians, all of you are voters. You have the tool that you can bring into the political discussions, political debates, and when you can ask your politicians who don't have to follow currently any EU strategies, but you can ask them, what do you plan to do about this and that? And then you can avoid them giving you a message, but rather ask them to give you policy. So they cannot say, I'm going to help young people, because that's not a policy. But if you have a strategy, even though maybe they're not currently implementing it, but there is something you can grasp on, and you know, I think it's easier to advocate if you have something to call on.
I would follow up what Josip just said. So you need to engage, you need to be there, you need to act on an informal level, on social media, on marches, on whatever that is of interest to you. And then, of course, you need to follow up that with something which is more structured. So, for instance, consultations, and here I'm coming with some recommendations you might find valuable as well. So, for instance, what I noticed is that youth is being consulted only on youth issues, so like youth law, youth strategy, but this is not fair, because we're citizens of our societies, and our interests vary way more than just youth issues. And as people that will inherit the world as it is now, and will live in this planet way longer, we need to be consulted of whatever decision making that is being taken. So we need to broaden the spectrum, and we need to demand more when it comes to consultations. And this is the semi-formal political engagement that youngsters can have. Another recommendation is, for instance, like introducing diaspora voting. Like you mentioned that a lot of youth are moving in EU member states, for instance, or other countries to either study or follow their professional careers, like traineeships, whatever, but not having them voting from where they're being based actually denies them a very a basic right. Of course, that has to be regulated within the state and everything, but we need to keep in mind how the world is changing, and we need to adapt to the needs of young people. Another recommendation is introducing e-voting, and Estonia is a pioneer on that, and they have already seen the product of introducing e-voting. For instance, like in 2014, they had like 0.5% of their youth from 18 to 24 years old not voting, 87%. And then when they introduced the voting system in 2005, if I'm not wrong, after many years of applying that, finally in 2015, they had 25% of young people voting in European Parliament elections. And then in, I think in 2016, 21.5% of young people voting through e-voting for local elections. So maybe this can also be a tool that our countries need to consider. And a final recommendation, be communicating to the youth. And we can see the results of the European Parliament campaigns in reaching out to the youth. So we need to inform the young group of the process of political participation, the formal one. And actually, from the data from the European Parliament, actually, there was the highest increase of young people participating into voting, especially the age group from 25 to 39 years old. A final thing would be to apply different lenses. For instance, young women, people coming from minorities, or for instance, like if we're having a voting system, are young women able to exercise freely their right to vote? Are they able through infrastructure tools to actually access the voting polls? Are people coming from minorities actually being informed of the voting system or other political participation tools? So whenever we're trying to engage, we also need to apply these different lenses so nobody is left behind. Thank you.
Thank you for these very concrete examples that you also brought to the discussion. Actually, something that really refers to the consultation theme that we touched upon today. When approved the new Erasmus Plus 2021-2027, the youth dialogue that is featured there would not be anymore just focused on youth policies issues, but on all across the policy spectrum, so on all policy fields, empowering the voice of young people, having their say in no matter what policy is at stake. That is in the proposal of the new Erasmus Plus regulation that is now under negotiations and will be enforced as of January 2021, but keep an eye on it. And now I think it's time again for collecting questions from, or comments or feedbacks from the audience. Down there, yes. And Mike?
So my name is Mikhail. I'm coming from a different industry, but I got interested because there are statistics and recommendations and that kind of things. So my first question is about the study that was made. There was a statement that above 50% of the people are migrating to other countries because of economical situation. So my question is, the statistical example that was taken, how many of the participants and what was the background of economical knowledge? So how much of the people were educated in economics? Because making that kind of decision to migrate, it's a bit of complex thing, you know, because I'm doing this all the time, considering to go or no, and mostly people in Macedonia are thinking every day. So I'm interested because you mentioned like 10 people were interviewed and the other ones were made through this system. So I would like to know what was the economical background knowledge of the people that were interviewed in order so they will answer that they will migrate because of economical or existential problems. First question. So I have more. The second question is to all the panel. I've heard this strategy and recommendation. So I would like to know what's the length in time of the feedback loop of these strategies, and what do you use to measure if they are successful or no? How do you design the concept? I don't know, I work in, it's called Lean Startup, so you say the hypothesis and then you evaluate if it's true or no. So I would like to know what's the length of the feedback loop? How, after how many months or years you know that this strategy or recommendation worked?
Madeline, over there. Anelia, don't kill yourself.
Thank you. I also have a few questions related to the study. If I'm not wrong, this is not the first one that is released. It is by Friedrich Ebert Stiftung. I think in 2015 was a similar one. Okay. And I want to ask if in the future there are perspectives to be repeated. And I also wanted to ask if at different times when it is released, it uses the same methodology or with differences.
Last question from the audience?
Yeah.
See none, so we move to the answers from the panelists. And Marija, I think, yeah, it's your turn.
Okay. First, I would like to answer about migration desire. So I can now talk about the Macedonian youth study and the statistical analysis because of the regional. I was not author of the regional youth study, so here I don't know the differences according to the demography characteristics. But our interferal statistics on advanced level that we have applied about the desire for migration showed us that young people can be divided in 3 categories about their desire to migrate to another country. The first 1/3 of the respondents have a very strong desire to migrate. 1/3 of the respondents have a medium desire. And 33% of the young people don't plan to migrate ever. With deep analysis and cluster analysis, we found that they can be profiled in three clusters according to the demographic characteristics. The age group of 14 till 19 is the group of young people, they have the most big desire to migrate, which means that these are the people who have primary school or high school completed, while the age group of 23 till 24 till 29, is the age cohort that has the lowest desire for migration. So the bachelor diploma or the faculty was not in the correlation. Academic success was not correlated with the migration desire. That's what is about the educational background, as I understand was your question. We didn't have other data about the education except only the level of completed education. Yes. Sorry, I didn't understand. We didn't have that question. So when you said about it was face-to-face survey with representative sample, which reflects the demographic characteristics of the young population in our country. We don't have this kind of information. For your question, it was, as I remember, this research study initiated by Friedrich Ebert Foundation is a really nice initiative. The first cycle or research wave was in 2013, 2012, 2014 in all the countries from the region. But 5 years later, Friedrich Ebert found out that it's better this time, the research studies to be synchronized simultaneously in the same time with the same research methodology. The research methodology relies on the German Shell youth studies, you know, the gas and oil company Shell. So it was their research methodology with some of the parts and sections that are reached by the methodology coordinators. It is planned, this research study, to be longitudinal or to be repeated every 5 years. Thank you. Sorry. Here is the head of the Friedrich Ebert Foundation office in Skopje, Ms. Seva, so I ask her if she has something to add.
Thanks. Just maybe really briefly to contextualize, we have these studies, as Marija has already explained, and in each country we work together with research institutes, either from universities or independent think tanks. And that's a really good collaboration and an important one, because those are the experts that also in part conduct the research and then analyze it. It is a huge project, not just in terms of budget, but really, more importantly, I think in terms of time, preparation, and thoroughness. The reason why we use this Shell study that was referred to is because there's a long tradition of this Shell study to be conducted in Germany. There is a template for it. And the intention is simply to have sort of comparable data. Now, I know that a lot of the questions, some of them are outdated, some of them don't always fit, but there's a huge benefit in having comparable data conducted with the same methodology throughout the region, because it actually allows you to speak in a more comprehensive and a more detailed way about some of the data. Now, of course, whether we can actually stick to the plan to have that repeated in 5 years again, it's difficult for me to say, but this certainly is the intention, because we've just noticed that there's always a shortage of information that you can base some of the recommendations and demands on that youth organizations may have for the region. So it's just also in order to provide you as people who are active in this field with some tools and something to actually
refer to when people may sort of challenge or question your demands or your, the questions you have to policymakers. So this is just also and should be seen as a tool that should somehow enable you and give you a bit more power, because it's not just sort of a qualitative assessment of I know a lot of people that, but it's rather really factual data and a representative study, which is very rare in the region.
Yeah, thanks for your comments on that. Alba?
Also another question on the strategy.
Yeah, and with that, we wrap the conversation up for today. So I think that if the three of you want to spend a few words, yes, please.
Thank you for reminding. Yeah. Regarding this strategy question, how long it takes, like after how long? Huh? Evaluation, yeah. Depends what do you want to do, and the bigger question is like how you have planned to measure it. The tool is very important. So sometimes you will just be focused on the process and see changes like after each activity. And sometimes you will need like to make like result-oriented plan. And but yeah, the question is what do you want to do and how you want to measure it? Like it could be, you can put like short-term indicators that you want to see after, I don't know, 3 months or after, I don't know, 1 year. Depends, yeah. You need to be more specific. You want to? Yeah, as I mentioned at the beginning, like for example, I mentioned this project Intercity Theater. I have another one, for example, we have project, it's so-called older brother, older sister. That means that we have educated each year like up to 50 students from social work study or psychology study, that they're supposed to be mentors to children they are coming from the orphanage, like children that they don't have like parental care. What we want to do with them is to strengthen their skills of these kids to become like really equal part of society and to prevent some addictions or, I don't know, delinquency or different kind of violence. So to protect them in a way. We do it like after every year, from September to June. We have like one student engaged with one child, and we are measuring like the process. For example, at the beginning, we ask child, we make some assessment, what about their social skills, what that children like need to change, and we make based on that some small tools or measures and activities. And after 1 year, we ask again these children, like child, what happened, what has changed, in different ways, of course, depending of the year of children. The same thing we do after 3 years. The children, they are included in the program like for 2 or 3 years, maybe even more, to measure the like long-term change, what happened. Because long-term goal is to prevent addiction prevention, to work on addiction prevention and violent prevention, and to strengthen all of these kids to find better solutions for going to school or to find jobs, because after 18 they have to leave from the orphanage and they need to find solutions for their lives. So it's like the process, long-term, short-term measurement. And at the end, like at this moment, I have to mention the most important thing. At this moment, after 15 years of implementing this program, I would say, we are now becoming part of the system, like social welfare system. Like the whole program is part of it. So that's success.
Thank you, Aida.
Yeah.
Alba.
Thank you. This, yeah, sorry.
Thank you for bringing the micro and grassroots approach just for the people who are not so familiar with the tools of policy making. So basically, whenever you have a strategy, it is drafted within a time frame. For instance, 2010 to 2020, or with a shorter period of applicability. And then that strategy is followed up usually by an action plan. And the action plan is actually the tool how you implement the strategy. And in the action plan, you have goals and you have indicators. And for each indicator, you also have a time frame. For instance, that indicator will be met within this year or this month with a collaboration of different stakeholders. So this is how it works. And then how you actually do proper monitoring, that depends on the stakeholders. And this is where we have to do our own homework, I would dare say it. For instance, it depends on young stakeholders for instance, on youth strategies to hold the government or whatever governance level accountable to that strategy. It depends on the different stakeholders having an invested interest to, again, monitor the applicability and the failures and the advantages or challenges of that strategy or action plan. And in that regard, I can bring an example of the action plan in Albania. For instance, it was drafted in 2015. And last year, the UNFPA, it's a UN agency, did a monitoring exercise with roundtables, and still it was not enough because it was divided in different chapters and people were not able to actually come with recommendations or come to actual conclusions. That actually showed that lack of consequent monitoring from the stakeholders led to, I would say, to not a proper monitoring after like 4 years when this UNFPA monitoring exercise was done. So if you don't do step-by-step monitoring after a couple of years, doing some exercise monitoring, it's not enough. So that's why we have to do our own homework and be active on a day-by-day basis. Thank you.
Thank you.
This was almost everything I wanted to say, but maybe just also important thing always to keep in mind, especially maybe when, maybe not today with recommendations, but it can be useful, is to actually know what do you want to look at. Is it output or outcome? This is the biggest and most important thing when evaluating something. For example, coming kind of back to the question you asked regarding the data. For example, you can have set a goal that you want to reduce youth unemployment from 50% to 30%. That is, and if you do it, that's a good output. But outcome, do those young people have quality jobs? Can they live from the job they're working? If they can't live, then that's not a good outcome, because okay, you reduced the unemployment, but it didn't solve that people can't live in that country. So this is, and those kind of things are usually not short term. They cannot be evaluated on a short term because it takes time, especially if you're making these big changes, societal changes. It has to be a long term. So you please be, when you're participating in this kind of process, always insist on action plans, on evaluation, on midterm evaluation, post-ante evaluation, everything, but also be careful not to fall in the trap of this output-outcome. Insist on the quality, not just on the quantity.
And with this very piercing remark, I think we can close this morning session. And as we knew from the beginning, this was meant to be a very powerful panel, and it has been a very powerful discussion. We had institutions, we had grassroots activists, we had academia and research bringing about numbers and datas. And thank you everyone for your comments, and especially for being constructive in the discussion on Slido. And keyword of this year's conference has been evidence-based policy recommendations. I feel there is a lot of evidence that has been mentioned today. So I please, speakers or organizers, share the presentations or the key data that were presented in the Facebook group, so that can be used also for the workshops that are about to start. And last but not least, thank you everyone for helping an Italian being as good, as strict as another fellow European in time management today. And now time for coffee break and workshop then. Thank you everyone again. Thank you team, Aida, Alba, Josip and Marija.